As the title says, there are too many games and not enough people to play them. This mainly affects multiplayer games, so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. In the old days, let's say 360, PS3 era, the maximum pool of games was smaller compared to today, and there was a huge pool of players to play them. Eventually, a game would slowly die down over time. This would take maybe a year for a big new release game to die, but now some games die within a week, which is a huge drop off. Multiplayer games used to stay alive no matter how bad they were. There wasn't many options to play, so the game would stay alive a little bit longer. But as time goes on, more and more games become available, and eventually, it seems like there was a point where the amount of games outweighed the people. Now, if a game comes out, there's a higher chance it will die within a week. I believe it's because there's so many game options that if it's not a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, people will just go back to whatever familiar games they were playing before. Obviously, this is what you should do, but this isn't the problem I have. My main problem is that even when a game is good that comes out, it dies too fast. Again, I believe it's because we have so many game options that the shelf life has gone down significantly. Let's talk about the past first. I'm mainly going to be talking about the Xbox 360, since that's what I played on at this time. I have never owned a PlayStation 3, 4, or 5, but I assume the experience is somewhat the same. I also didn't play on PC at this point, so maybe these statements are false, but again, this is how I remember things. Back in the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 to early Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era, it felt like everyone was playing mostly the same games, since there weren't too many well-known companies. Everyone was playing Halo, Call of Duty, Battlefield, etc. There weren't many options to choose from, so those games would survive longer no matter how good or bad they were. Both Xbox and PlayStation had a marketplace with indie games, but they weren't as big as they are today. Every now and then a really good indie game would come out and have a good following, but they were usually a single player or co-op experience, and it wasn't trying to have a long shelf life. It was a fun little experience to have when you had some money to spare, and the multiplayer indie games were fun for a small audience to play when they got bored with the usual Call of Duty or Battlefield, and they would have a good, consistent player base for a while. Now, I will concede that maybe indie games have a longer shelf life on consoles, even to this day, but I can't confirm that because I only play PC now. Jumping to the present, in today's gaming scene, it seems like many games die on arrival. AAA games that used to be on top are now just as vulnerable as indie games. It used to be rare when a AAA developer had a game die instantly, but now it's pretty common. Games like Battlefield 2042 shouldn't have such low players in a few weeks of its lifespan. Again, I assume it's because there are so many games coming out, and are out, that it has passed the amount of players playing them. I think we have made it to a point where it's not viable to make a multiplayer game. The successful ones are few and far between, and by successful I mean a game that lasts at least a year, since that's what companies seem to be striving for. Some of them even prefer longer, like 10 years, which is mostly impossible. It seems like these companies are trying to have their League of Legends or Counter-Strike game that never loses players, but it's not really working for them. Again, going back to supply and demand, I think the supply has heavily outweighed the demand. We don't really need a new game every day or every year. There isn't enough people to play them, so I think it's all pointless. The amount of dead online games and marketplaces is pretty depressing. It's especially depressing when you see your favorite game from your past be dead. Remembering the great times you had on that game and realizing you most likely will never be able to play it again is super sad. Okay, look, I really like Lawbreakers. I think it was a great game that didn't get a fair chance. I don't think it died because it was a bad game. I think it died because of bad press and not much hype for it. I feel like if it came out in the 360, PS3, the Xbox One, PS4 era, then it would have been a hit. If I remember correctly, I think it got compared to Overwatch, even though it wasn't really like Overwatch, but it was dubbed as a bad Overwatch clone anyway. But I can see that from far away it does look like it. To me, the gameplay was very fun and satisfying. It just didn't have the player base to sustain it, so it died after about 2 months. It was sad to see the headlines every week pointing out how many players were still playing the game until it finally died. It was legitimately a great game, and it didn't even have the time to be updated to fix people to the issues. Sorry, I had to get the Lawbreakers rant out there just to have some defense for it. A more recent example is a game called Lemniscate. This game has an amazing gimmick, and I think it would absolutely blow up if it had the hype. Sadly, it got little hype, so of course it died. It just pains me to see games like these with really cool concepts and fun gameplay die because of lack of players. I could easily see this game having a really cool esports league, but at this rate it will never happen. I'm adding this in after the video was pretty much done, but I forgot to put this in. I looked at the store page for Lemniscate, and pretty much everyone that left a review are saying the same things I've been saying, which makes sense because Lemniscate is truly a highly underrated game. I will also add this here. I find it funny when people say don't buy, game's dead, because if the game is dead then you want people to buy it so it won't be dead. I get why people say it to warn people, but it's a funny paradox to me. Alright, back to the rest of the video. In the end, I just made this video because I think we're at a point where it's not really viable to make a new multiplayer only game, since only a small percentage will last at least a year. Where before, games would have a good player base for a longer time, unless the game has a lot of hype, it will not make it in this new age of gaming. Where we have so many options of what to play, and in the end, every game has to die at some point, and I can't really say what should and shouldn't be popular. It's a hard question for me. On one hand, I like the idea of an unlimited amount of games to play, but at the same time, there are so many not being played, so it feels like there was no point in making them. But you won't know what's a successful game until you release it, so it's a hard problem to solve. I like the amount of options for games that we have now, but I wanted to give my thoughts on the gaming industry in a way I haven't really seen anyone talk about. Hopefully one day, someone who's better at researching stuff than me will legitimately look into this. This video was just feelings I had for a long time with the game industry, so I didn't do super in-depth research. I could also be completely wrong, and it's always been like this. As a child, you only have a limited amount of games to play, so maybe I haven't noticed it until I became an adult. I don't really think this is true, but maybe someone will prove me wrong one day.